there are times when, in other words, if you think the truth lies with the Yerushalmi, you would go with the Yerushalmi against the Bavli. I mean, the Rambam did that. You find
the Rambam does that sometimes, correct? Right. And also, by the way, so do other Rishonim, particularly Ashkenazi Rishonim, on more than one occasion. In fact, many occasions.
But if we look at what the Meforshim do, the Meforshim will always try and find another Talmud Bavli that backs. You may disagree with it, but that backs up. In other words, they'll try and explain a Rambam based on another Bavli. The fact that the Rambam paskins like the Yerushalmi occasionally is something that gives the commentaries a lot of problems.
Hang on, but before we, excuse me for interrupting, but before we try and deal with the problems, the issues that certain Mefarshim may have had with this or that psak of the Rambam, let's discuss the Rambam himself. You just admitted that occasionally the Rambam is posek halacha like the Yerushalmi against the Bavli. Correct?
No, I said seemingly against the Bavli, because we have to...
Well, seemingly according to the Ravad, and seemingly according to the Gra, and seemingly according to the Rashabasa. Apparently it's so.
We have to fit him in.
We don't have to do anything. First we have to look at what the Rambam writes and understand what he writes. We don't have to fit anybody, Vaday not the Rambam Zal, into any particular box that we may have created. That's number one. If the Rambam tells you on the one hand, as you understood, and as you mentioned a moment ago, and as you understand it, that the halakha is always like the Talmud Bavli. And if, on the other hand, the same Rambam himself doesn't always follow that rule, that already tells you that this is not a hard and fast rule. That's how I see it, number one. Number two, I think we have to backtrack a bit, not again, get involved in all kinds of discussions amongst the Mefarshim of the Rambam. Let's go back to the source of the issue, the essential issue. The essential question should be, when the Rambam tells you the halakha is like the Talmud Bavli, and I want to quote that particular statement to you in a moment.
Edition, by the way?
It's not. It's actually better than the Rav Gafech's Zal. My Rav Gafech's Shlitta book. It's even better than his, but it's not that different. The real question, the person who sees what the Rambam just told us a moment ago in his Hakdama and Oth Kaf Gimel, that we, from the Mishnah and all the Talmudim and all the Braithot, etc., we can discover the truth and what is the halacha. Then the Rambam in Oth Lamed Aleph and Lamed Beth, etc., talks about the authority of the Talmud Bavli. And he says, he says two things, not one thing. Most people, for some reason, only take notice of the second thing. The second thing the Rambam says is, Ho'il, everyone is required to follow the Talmud Bavli. So he says, Ho'il v'chol otham ha'devarim sheba Talmud hiskimu alehem kol Yisrael. But he says something else as well. V'otham ha'chamim she'ithkinu o she'gazaru o she'hinhichu o she'danu din v'limedu sha'mishpat kachu hem kol ha'chmei Yisrael o ruban v'hen she'shama'u ha'kabbalah be'ikare ha'torah kulah ish mipi ish, etc. The Rambam's point also, this comes at the end of a lengthy enumeration of the Doroth of Kabbalat HaTorah and all the Chachamim who passed on their knowledge from one generation to the next. The important thing here to understand is that the Rambam is telling you as follows, and this is what we have to ask ourselves: why should the halacha be like this particular book, the Talmud Bavli, for example? Or you could ask the same question: why should it be like the Talmud Yerushalmi? Why should it be like anything in particular? Why should it follow any particular text? The answer is that Am Yisrael knows that these people that we generally, vaguely refer to as Hazal were the experts in Torah. When I have a problem with my plumbing, I call a plumber. I'm not comparing Chas v'Shalom plumbing to Torah, but just by way of analogy. If I have a medical issue, I go to a doctor. Why? Maybe I'm twice as clever as a doctor, but not on this issue. On this issue, he's the mumhay. Chazal are the experts when it comes to Torah. The first and essential reason that we follow Chazal, Bichlal, all of Chazal, without distinguishing right now between Bavel or Eretz Yisrael, is because they were the Mekablei Torah and they were the experts in Torah, and their opinion therefore carries great weight, and it is really the closest we can come to a Sanhedrin when there is no Sanhedrin. In other words, the Talmud is essentially a substitute for the Sanhedrin. The Rambam in the Hoffman Perek Aleph describes at length how the Sanhedrin is the Ikar Torah She'Ba'al Peh, Shemisham Yosa'ah Hora'ah L'Chol Yisrael. That the Sanhedrin is the real authority. So what the question then becomes, so what do you do when there's no Sanhedrin? The next best thing to a Sanhedrin is a text or a body of texts that presents all the opinions and all the explanations of those great Chachamim who received the Torah from the early generations when there was a Sanhedrin. In Eretz Yisrael there was a Sanhedrin till mid 4th century, Minyanan. In Bavel there never was, but all of these Chachamim, both in Bavel and in Eretz Yisrael, received the essential tradition of Torah, and they were the experts. In other words, there were no real experts in Torah who were not included in this term, this group known as Chazal. In Chazal we have different opinions on different things, certainly, but those opinions were discussed and were examined by later Chachamim in later generations. From all that information, you have something like a Beth Din. In other words, you have a discussion. You have Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. You have Rabbi Eliezer and you have Rabbi Yoshua. And they give you different points of view, different explanations. And then Amoraim come and explain these positions according to their tradition, or according to their svara, etc. This is what goes on in a Beth Din. What would happen in a Beth Din if a question was brought before a Beth Din? Then one Chacham would express an opinion, perhaps one of the more senior Chachamim, and another senior Chacham perhaps would express perhaps a different opinion. And then the other members of the Sanhedrin, if we're talking about the Beth Din Gadol, we're talking about 71 people, they would begin to discuss and begin to say, why does Kvodo say this and why do you say that? And the result of all that discussion would eventually, hopefully, be a psak halacha. In the same way, we hear the echo of this kind of discussion in the Talmud, and from that we are able to glean a result.
What you're saying, just in a nutshell, is as follows. Correct me if I'm wrong. The paragraph of establishing truth and going after truth is limited by Chazal. Obviously, if you think something is the truth, but it's not something that Chazal said, then you can't follow that in terms of establishing halacha. For example, if you think that pshat in a pasuk is one thing, and it's keneged the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, the Sifra, the Sifri, every member of Chazal, then that's outside of the parameters of what can be done.
Of course, I cannot do that.
Okay. However, if there are Chazal that say it, and you are trying to analyze it, you can come to truth by choosing one voice in Chazal. I think that's basically the essence of what you've been saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. In other words, a Talmud Chacham, and I think, even though you didn't say this, but I imagine that this is limited to only Talmidei Chachamim that were magia to a certain level of hara. It's not something that any person, on the street.
It's obviously not something that every yeshiva bocher who turned 18 yesterday can do.
Right.
No.
Okay, but the parameters of how halacha, the guidelines of halacha that Machon Shilo establishes is we look at the multiplicity of voices in Chazal, and using our notion of truth, right, we can choose one. If one is Magia Lahora, we can choose one over the other, even taking a Shlitta of B'marava Amru more than the conclusion of the Talmud Bavli or other Rishonim. Is that essentially the Shlitta?
I can't answer what you just said with a yes or a no, because I'm not sure exactly where you're going with this. But I understand what you're trying to do, and I'm doing my best to answer you as honestly and as precisely as possible. First of all, Machon Shilo did not invent any new halachic system, per se. I said to you before, and I reiterate, the halachic system the Rambam describes
I'm not saying that
is essentially
what that system is.
All right, the Rambam's Shita is very much serves as a blueprint for what we do in Machon Shilo. But it's not just the Rambam. The same is true of the Maharami Prague, and the same is true of Rabbeinu Tam, and the same is true